keep it a little bit more cozy. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation to come and talk to you today about the health of Lake Simcoe. And then today's going to talk after me about the work that they do with the rest of Lake Simcoe Coalition. My name is Ben Longstaff. I'm the General Manager of Integrated Watershed Management and Conservation Authority. And under my team, we cover areas such as the environmental monitoring program that looks at both the tributaries of the lake. We look at source water, drinking water source protection, and watershed scale planning and implementation. So we're asked today to give an overview of the health of Lake Simcoe, and we've had this presentation for a number of months that we've been taking out on the road and giving to people and updating it where we can and modifying it as necessary. So I'm going to go through that, and if there's any questions along the way, please feel free to jump in and clarify anything if I'm not being clear. Just for starters, just wanted to give a little background around the actual lake monitoring program that we have. We actually started it a little over a decade ago in 2008 in recognition that we are working at the Ministry of Environment, Climate Change and Parks now with the Ministry of Natural Resources and Fisheries throughout their monitoring as well. So it wasn't to come in and obviously do what they're doing already, but was to come in and fill a gap in the monitoring that was needed. And that was really what we're calling our nearshore area, MECP focusing on offshore areas of the lake, MNRF on the fisheries. We come in looking at the more nearshore zone, looking at aquatic plants, invasive species. And of course, any monitoring program, there's multiple rationales and reasons for monitoring. One of them is to identify any issues or emerging trends, and another one obviously is to be able to provide feedback into what we call the adaptive management cycle. Are the management actions we're taking having the desired effect? Much like if you go to the physician every year for your annual checkup, the physician isn't just going to use one indicator of your health, such as your blood pressure. The physician is going to look at a number of different indicators: body mass index, blood counts, sugar levels, etc., etc. And the same goes for Lake Simcoe. You may hear a lot around the phosphorus in the lake, and that absolutely is important. I'm going to talk about that. But when we look at the lake, we really want to look at a broad suite of biological indicators and physical chemical indicators. For example, oxygen levels, water clarity, invasive species, ice quality, aquatic plants. So we're really trying to look at a whole suite of indicators, and the reason we're looking at that is because there are multiple different stresses and factors impacting on the health of the lake. The ones I've mentioned phosphorus already. Phosphorus is important. Why we're looking at that is largely because of land use change. 200-300 years ago, when the landscape around here was all just wetlands and forests and grasslands, of course, over time, gone into agriculture and urbanization. It comes with that an increasing pollutants. An important one in the freshwater ecosystem is phosphorus. And the reason being is phosphorus, obviously, is a fertilizer. You have enough phosphorus, you have enough light, and you have enough water temperature. It's going to obviously cause the plants to grow, either the large macrophytes, the big ones you can see, or the microscopic ones that are in the water column. And when they decay, the bacteria that are involved in the decaying process consumes the oxygen. And it's the consumption of oxygen leads to low dissolved oxygen levels in the lake, which of course is critical for the survival of the fish. And that's that kind of connection that's really important between the phosphorus, the plant growth, and the decay of that leading to low dissolved oxygen. Yes, question? Yeah.
Ben, are you going to provide us with your slides at the end?
We absolutely can, yeah.
Okay,
yeah,
thanks.
That would help. I believe there's a video of it too, so you can keep repeating it if you like. Of course, then there's invasive species for us, and I'll talk about these a lot, is obviously if the mussels, the invasive mussels, the quagga mussels, aquatic plants, and some of the large impacts they have on the health of the lake. And more so, we're trying to grapple around our understanding of what impacts climate change is happening, but I won't go too far on that today. So let's talk about phosphorus loading straight away, and that's the total amount of phosphorus that's coming into Lake Simcoe at any given year, and we monitor that best that we can. Phosphorus loads is in tons, and this year represents each particular year. And what you can see out of that, also I'll talk about, there is the Lake Simcoe Protection Plan, I'm sure you're all aware of, and they set a long-term target of achieving 44 tonnes. And that 44 tonnes It's based on the fact that some relationship established, the modelling was undertaken to help restore the oxygen levels back to retain cold water fisheries for the lake trout, for example. So there's that relationship between the target and recovering of oxygen levels. So one thing that's obviously very obvious in there, we're well still above the target, unfortunately. You'll also see that it's very variable from year to year, and that variability is due to the fact that there's a very strong relationship between the amount of phosphorus coming into the lake each year and the precipitation rainfall, the runoff, in a sense. So a lot of this, what's in this bar, in individually bars, is a sum of all the loads coming in. It could be from the atmosphere, wastewater treatment plants, from the Holland Marsh, and also from the flow of all the tributaries. And those flows obviously vary greatly from year to year. And of course, if you get a wet year, like 2008, 2009, you get high phosphorus levels. So we're seeing this great variability from year to year, and we're still well above the target. It's also important to point out that the target is a very aggressive target. It's only around 12 tonnes more than what we predicted or estimate was the load coming to the lake pre-settlement time. So a very aggressive target. So then, still on phosphorus, this is the phosphorus concentration. So this is the amount of phosphorus that's actually within the water column itself. We use the units of micrograms per litre. But what's very obvious over time since the 1980s is that the concentration has been coming down. So this is one of the good news stories. So it's around 7.5 micrograms per litre in the last 5 years or so. That is actually below what the provincial water quality guidelines. So that's good news. And it's actually significantly below where things were in the 1970s. So there's a lot of actions, as you know, 70s, 80s around moving towards phosphorus-free detergents, wastewater treatment plant updates, some of those lower hanging fruits at that time to make those improvements. And it is actually even below what we believe the concentrations were, perhaps more in the natural system, dating back a few hundred years. So the last water quality aspect I want to talk about then is the oxygen levels, the deep water oxygen, as I mentioned, that relationship between the phosphorus and the oxygen. And what we're seeing here in this case is the oxygen, deep water so we want to look at deep water, Kevin felt there, really focusing on those areas where we're seeing a habitat for lake trout. And again, we have the Lake Simcoe Protection Plan target of 7 milligrams per litre. And you can see that there has been this increasing trend over time, which is a good news story. There are some times when it's actually even exceeded that. And again, we actually, if you go back a number of years, the reason why there was a lot of focus on dissolved oxygen back in the 19th, recently we're seeing that the concentrations are around 3 milligrams per litre dating back for a long period of time. But really, in the last 20 years or so, we've seen some improvement, which is, as I said, good news. Yeah.
This is amazing. It's 1820. That dissolved oxygen level was so low.
That's what we believe. So we use coring based on the types of diatoms that are collected in the sediment. You can use those as a direct relationship to understand. You can understand what diatom species are in the sediment, and you have an understanding of what their oxygen requirements are. So if you go back and say, okay, you've got that species of diatoms present, right, you can have an understanding that the oxygen levels are in those areas. So there was, that's what our linologist is saying.
And do you think that that is related to just the massive deforestation of the
I would
watershed
imagine so
around
at that time, absolutely, yeah. So they've gone through these, obviously, these cycles. So shifting now into invasive mussels. As I mentioned before, there's the zebra mussel, which everyone's very aware of. Perhaps few people are aware of the quagga mussels. They're both coming from the same area of southern Russia, but at slightly different times. The zebra mussels invaded first into Lake Simcoe around this 1991, 1995 period, and then quagga mussel in around 2004. And you know, most people it's very hard in many respects, unless you've got a bit of an expert eye, to really differentiate between these two mussels. They look very similar. A lot of people think they've got a zebra mussel and it might actually be a quagga mussel. But each of these species have had a huge ecological impact on the lake itself, changing the water clarity, food webs, and nutrient cycling. And one of those main reasons comes back down to this statistic that based on the amount of zebra quagga mussels around in the lake, we estimate the equivalent of the volume of the lake is filtered through one of the mussels around every 2.75 days. And of course, every time it's going through a mussel, they have this great capacity to filter out any of that material in the lake for food. So we have been monitoring the mussels since 2009. We also repeated that 2015. We'll do that again in 2019. 2009, the zebra mussel population, as you can see in the different colours of blue, were pretty much throughout the lake. Around 84% of the biomass was zebra mussels. What's important to note too, this white area, less than 20 meters, greater than 20 meters depth, we couldn't find zebra mussels. They can't grow in those deeper waters, high light waters. And then we advanced to our monitoring of 2015. You can see a very big shift. Much fewer zebra mussels out there, really being restricted down to the Cook's Bay area, a little bit of Kempen Fell, certainly in other areas, but significant reduction in that distribution of the zebra mussels. In contrast, we have the quagga mussels, which are there, you can see, this was the distribution 2009. Yes, throughout the lake, but in the low concentration and low biomass. But move forward to 2015, you can see the quagga mussels are now throughout the lake. And when I say throughout the lake, importantly, we're seeing them now in this deeper water area. So that's kind of very soft, muddy sediments, which the zebra mussels couldn't survive in, but these species can survive there. Not only that, one of the questions is why did we see that change or that shift in the mussel population? Is that they're better survivors. They can now compete with zebra mussels. They can survive on the mud and silt. The better they can survive, feed longer, spawn longer in colder climates, and they have better food efficiencies, be able to kind of survive off the lower content of particulate matter in the water column. And I'll come to what some of those consequences are, which is actually if the phytoplankton or the mussels are filtering things out early on in the season, we believe it might be affecting the spring algal growth. There's more food, we're taking more food out from the deeper waters of the lake. And actually you can see in the fact that some of the municipal infrastructure that was put deliberately down deep away from the zebra mussels, now these things can grow, now the quagga mussels are growing deeper. We've seen the quagga mussels impact on, at least within York region, some of the drinking water intakes. So one of the impacts has been, and most probably you're aware of some of these, is that change in water clarity due to the amazing filtering capacity of these zebra mussels. To measure water clarity, we use something called a Secchi disc. This is the Secchi disc. It's basically a dinner-sized plate cut into black and white quarters, and we lower that down over the side of the boat to the extent where we can almost not see it anymore. When you can just kind of lower it up and down, you can't see it anymore, just bring it up. That's what we call a Secchi disc. That's a universal tool, one of the best tools in the world. We use it out in the oceans, in lakes, estuaries, etc., for measuring water clarity. And we can see that in the 1980s, leading up to this kind of period when the mussels were coming into the lake, you've got a clarity of around 4.5 meters. Lower the disc, 4.5 meters, and you can just see it still. Move forward, unfortunately we have this data gap, but after this data gap, we come back in and we do some of this monitoring again, and the depth of water, the clarity is up to 7.3 meters. So we've got this data that supports the fact that we've got this cleaning of the water. Also, what we've seen now, since the quagga mussels have come in, they're filtering earlier before the lake stratified. We're seeing Secchi disc depths of around 23 meters. That means if you lower this disc into the water, 23 meters, you're still seeing it. And this is sort of clarities you're seeing out in very clean oceans, which is now we're seeing in Lake Simcoe. So, to summarize all of that in a kind of a bit of a picture of what we've moved and changed from really back in the 1995 period, we had a lake that had like a lot of phosphorus coming into it, aquatic plants fringing the shallow areas, and a lot of this whole productivity of the surface waters were a lot more soupy and green, capturing the light and basically cooking away high productivity. But we move forward now to a period where you've got that clear water due to the zebra mussels and the quagga mussels, Certainly you've got the nutrients coming in from the phosphorus still, but what's happening is that's being kind of captured, pulled and shunted down into the sediment. You've now got more light coming in deeper, so you've got aquatic plants and now coming down deeper into the down into the lake. So a big, big change to the whole ecology of the lake due to these invasive species. So that's a good segue in a sense to talk now about what we've seen in change of the aquatic plants growth in the lakes, and we've seen this shift. So like plants. So we have again been monitoring the aquatic plants for the last decade or so in an extensive survey right across the lakes. It's important to understand the aquatic plants are a critical, important aspect of the health of the lake. They're a nursery ground, they're an area where fish can seek refuge, for example. They help protect the shoreline from erosion, they kind of battle wave action. But we also understand that we can have too many of them that can obviously wash up this time of the year to the shoreline and cause concerns for residents, impact on boating and fishing, the quality of boating and fishing. So finding sometimes they can get to that nuisance level. So we have 21 species in the lake, 3 of which are invasive. So 2 of those came in 1994. And the starry stonewort, which I'll talk a little bit around, was first identified as being in the lake in 2009. And this is a picture of, well, this is a picture of the starry stonewort. You can just see what thick, dense mats that forms. I'll talk a bit more about that. And these are these other 2. That's the water milfoil and curly pondweed. So this series of maps shows the change in shows both the distribution of the aquatic plants across the lake and what that change has been over the last decade. This is very new, fresh off the press data from last year. The first thing to point out, of course, is where we're seeing the aquatic plants. We know we're seeing them in places where it's shallower, you've got the softer sediments, you've got some protection from the wave actions, which is obviously places like Kempenfeld Bay, like Cook's Bay, behind Georgina Island, Vancouver Island, where there's a little bit more protection and shallower. But what's also obvious from this slide is that, say, take this area around Georgina Island, that biomass has now increased significantly over the past decade, and a lot of that is driven by the starry stonewort. So there it is again, this is the starry stonewort, specific starry stonewort biomass. We first saw it in a sample in 2009, and then over time we've started to see it in more and more places across the lake. 2018, part of that intensive survey, we've seen it pretty much everywhere. And actually now we did a quick other survey in 2019, this year, because we were concerned about it. I think now we're seeing it pretty much throughout the bay, even in Kempenfeld Bay itself. So this invasive species is now throughout the lake, unfortunately. One of the consequences, I talked before about the importance of the aquatic plant habitat, that it provides the structure, like a forest for the fish to live in amongst, food source, protection from predation. If you now add a species that's really just a big, thick mass of algal growth, it's really, in a sense, pushing it's no longer habitat in a sense. You can see the smaller fish are pushed out into the out where they can get greater predation. So there's a big ecological impact that we understand may be occurring, but of course there's also the social economic impacts associated with fishing and boating. So it really did fly under the radar for us and for many others. It really wasn't something that was on the invasive species list in the province. We started doing some investigations and calling up all our neighbouring environmental groups, trying to understand, have you seen it, and to what extent. And based on that, we kind of put this map together, kind of pinpointing where it's been seen. And of course, if you know the Trent 7 waterway system, you can see that it pretty much matches up through the Trent 7 waterway system. Out actually now, folks are seeing it out in Seven Sound. So fortunately, we are seeing that this species most probably came through the Trent 7 waterway, which is always a concern for us. We're always concerned about invasive species coming in through the Trent 7. It is one of the challenges is that it's an algae, and it's got these the way that an algal can grow, you can actually kind of break it in half in a sense, and then each piece will grow independently. Like an aquatic plant, you break off a leaf or a vascular plant. It's not, the leaf's not just going to go off and grow. But in an algae, you can break it apart like that, and each piece of it is going to go off and grow and double and multiply. So this is a challenge that you face. You start putting in mechanical measures, you think you're doing a good job mechanically removing this, but you're creating fragments. And those fragments can actually double every 2 to 3 days. So we have some concerns, obviously, from the ecological point of view, but we start seeing this maybe coming into the marinas, how it might fold up as well. So again, we've adapted our monitoring program. We've been monitoring this more on an annual basis now to get a better understanding of what impacts this may have. Of which, obviously, we're projecting that might increase washed up plant material on the shorelines, cost to recreational swimming and things like that. So just a couple more slides. I did mention we also try to investigate the impacts of climate change. One of the measures that we're looking at is the change in ice cover for Kempenfelt Bay. We're very fortunate to have had, I don't know the true details behind it, residents that were monitoring when Kempenfelt Bay became completely ice-locked, and then when that ice lock broke up apart, dating back to 1850s, some of the greatest, longest records we have in Canada, I believe. Unfortunately, what you can see by that trending data is that we've gone from a period of 126 days of complete ice covering Kempenfelt Bay to that being around 93 days. So at my group now, we're really trying to understand what does that mean to the health of the lake when you've got less ice cover on the lake in itself. Suddenly again, so you've got more light being able to penetrate. Maybe you've got the phytoplankton growing early in the season, for example. What does that impact on the dissolved oxygen levels? So all sorts of questions, well, I say ice cover. Of course, there's huge, social and economic aspects around ice fishing associated with that as well, as the actual ecological impact. And another area that we've been working on quite intensively over the last number of years is winter salt, road salt application. This is data that shows the chloride levels in the lake, milligrams per litre, dating back to the 1970s, and you can see this continual trend, which we believe in the next 50 or so years will get above what we call the guidelines of 120 milligrams for chronic impacts. And of course the same goes for the tributaries, or more worse so in some sense for some of the tributaries in the urban creeks. You actually have very, very high concentrations of salts, obviously, in the winter time, in the spring when salt is rushing off. So we are, as an organisation, probably one of the leading conservation authorities, and working with a lot of other sectors to really try and resolve this issue of chloride levels. So I do want to just end up a couple of slides on talking about the efforts that we're taking within the Conservation Authority to help improve the watershed and the lake. In a sense, this could be presentation or more presentation on its own, all the different facets and the complexities of that. But one of that is that we have in the last at least probably 7 or 8 years really been taking it urban focused. And that is you're recognising that stormwater ponds, which that's one there, if you're looking at the presentation, these types of stormwater ponds that we believed were a good way of managing our stormwater are not having the desired effects. They fill up slowly with sediment as they're designed to do, maybe not being maintained as they should be, and they're not leading to the water quality improvements that they should be. So we've been moving towards something called green infrastructure, low impact development, in a sense that we're trying to mimic nature as close to the source as possible, using things like rain gardens and bioswales, something much more natural, green infrastructure that we can integrate into our community. We have instituted what we call our zero phosphorus discharge policy, to say all new development and redevelopment must achieve zero phosphorus discharge from their property. If they can't achieve that through trying to do best management practices on site, then there's a cash in lieu payment to the Conservation Authority through the phosphorus offsetting program. We take that money and we make sure that we achieve that phosphorus offset elsewhere, close by or within that watershed to achieve. So if they can't, if they aren't able to, say, remove, there's still a kilogram of phosphorus coming off, that payment for that $33,000 to reduce that kilogram, we take that, and we're often using that to come in and retrofit some of the existing urban areas that don't have stormwater management. A lot of downtown Barrie, the older parts of Barrie, there's no stormwater management because it wasn't required in those early days when the area was developing. We're also undertaking a range of low impact development restoration projects like techniques projects ourselves, This is a project we completed in the town of Newmarket. Instead of having a stormwater drain under here, this is a bioswale. So the rain water comes through this cut through and infiltrates into the ground, and then into the bioswale, and then slowly infiltrates into the ground in itself. So instead of the normal, goes to the storm sewer and rushes off into the creek, we've been monitoring this, and even after a large storm, very, very small amounts of water will be going into the creek now, which is a good thing, because obviously I've talked about flood impacts, etc., but there's all those issues associated with stormwater as well. I'll put a picture of where stormwater ponds can get to. You can see that's just really a big cooking cesspool that's actually leading to sometimes more phosphorus coming into the lake. On the natural heritage system side of the equation, again, lots of work that we're undertaking. We've developed a natural heritage system and restoration strategy. We have tree planting, forestry programs. We undertake restoration projects such as creating wetlands, restoring, taking dams out of wetland, out of tributaries, restoring grasslands. We have a stewardship grants program. We have community tree planting events. And finally, I just wanted to bring this one to your attention. For you, and maybe you've come across it, I'm not sure. This is part of our non-profit group, the Simcoe Conservation Foundation. They raise money, and it comes back into the authority to undertake projects, which is called our Inspiring Green Communities. It's a voluntary program, so door builders and developers within new home construction. Each newly constructed home sold donated $250 to the foundation. And the foundation obviously puts that towards restoration projects. And when the foundation then leaves a kind of gift bag for the new residents, that includes a number of things on the green, eco-friendly side of the equation to help them settle into the community. For example, I think there's a gift certificate from the Bradford Greenhouse, for example. So I don't know if any of you have seen that, if you're selling to some new residents. So, yeah, thanks very much. I hope that's been informative. And if there has been any other questions along the way, we can either take them now or in a couple of minutes. Yeah.
What happened to the zebra mussels? Did they get taken down by the zebra mussels?
Outcompeted by the quagga mussels.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. It's not unusual for an invasive species. This quite well replicated invasive species will do very well. Mm-hmm. And then as other species in the area kind of get to understand or understand is probably a poor word, but anyway, it'll come down again. And one case is initially, say for example, a lot of the fish species wouldn't know how to eat it, right? Okay, the bat, right? Now we're finding, okay, the bats are full of zebra mussels and quagga mussels, so they're starting to use it as a food source, right? So those are typically what happens is it takes a little bit of time to adapt and then come down, but I think it's a combination of those two. Mm-hmm. What we're interested in, not sure about, what will happen to that quagga mussel population. Will that do the same thing? So that's a good reason for you to continue to monitor that.
Ben, I noticed in your natural heritage strategies, so in the annexed lands and other lands, I've noticed great swaths where it's a continuum with the idea that wildlife and et cetera, have this uninterrupted path, if you will, to.
Sure.
But in looking at some of the maps and specific to different property owners, it looks like, I don't know how the boundaries were established, because in certain areas it almost looks as though there are flat football fields without forestation or stream that are part of this swath that could have been either industrial or residential. And it looks as though the heritage system is a sacred cow. Once it's designated, you can't go back and change it.
Yeah. With our natural heritage, I'll have to be clear on which one what you're looking for. You're talking about the maps in our natural heritage system are really trying to identify areas where we could undertake restoration works to help restore those corridors. So it could be an area of land to say, look, that could be a good area for future restoration.
I don't think it's restoration, because down in this area it's undeveloped.
Right.
So I think it was the city's intention to get it right this time and have these natural heritage systems, but I'm questioning the boundaries. Some of them look overly large.
Right. Or if it's a football field, you say maybe not what would you call it, I can't talk to the specifics of that, apart from saying that, as I guess as a future aspirations we're working towards, that it would be able to come into there and undertake the necessary restoration to create that connectivity. So I can certainly put you in touch with the personal development strategy if you have any questions.
I will. I do.
Questions.
I have lots of questions.
Okay.
Who's sort of helping out? Like, are municipalities jumping on board and sort of supporting this? Is this provincial initiatives? Is anybody failing?
All of the above.
Okay.
All of the above. I mean, as Conservation Authority, our base funding comes from municipalities to support this type of monitoring. But we've also, through the Lake Simcoe Protection Plan over the last decade, there's been significant funding that's helped on a number of different areas. And also prior to that, the province has been a long time supporter for us, say, to undertake the phosphorus loads assessments. And previously there was federal funding, the Lake Simcoe Cleanup Fund was talked about in that as well. So all levels of government have been helping.
Okay. Are user groups kicking into? Is there any good initiatives with user groups, like say Rotary clubs or anybody else sort of chipping in?
There are various ones. We do try to manage that carefully. If I can say the amount of time sometimes on the return, you need to really look at that. Is that really towards building good relationships and educating and outreach versus the efficiencies of getting a project in the ground?
Okay.
Right? There's a kind of play off between those that we're always looking at. Particularly in the last number of years, we've been very focused on let's do things on the ground, right? And sometimes to the extent of some of that outreach.
Chicken and egg, what comes first? If you're looking at a proposal for development, do you go to the Conservation Authority first, or do you go to the municipality?
Back and forth. I think probably both. Well, you've got to come to us. What we're trying to do is something called doing design assurance. So working with the municipality, working with the developers to get in as early as possible in the whole design process, particularly as it comes to this concept of low impact development. So if you meet with us early, with our hydrologists, our natural heritage system restoration experts, our engineers, bring in the municipal experts as well, bring in your consultants. We can all work together very early on in the process to say, how can we maximize this piece of property for everybody's benefit? And we've been doing that on a number of projects and realizing the payback for everybody is huge in terms of being able to not have to go backwards and forwards into the future. We can get the required approvals from our municipalities a lot sooner. So I think in terms of which one's first and second, I guess I skipped that. But what's really important for us, the direction that we're coming to, is make sure let's all work collaboratively from the very beginning on that development. Because the low impact development's not around just, the old ways of doing it is you kind of look, here's the development, here's the stormwater size of the stormwater pond that we need to put in. Now moving towards low impact development, it's really got to say, okay, if there's some natural areas there, you've got some soils that can permeate a lot of water very easily. Why build over those? Why don't we try and create the development so you can infiltrate water in those areas? So that's why it's important to meet very early in the process.
Sounds like a big Excel sheet, just solving for X, moving it around, moving the formula around.
Yeah, we've actually built a tool, a modelling tool specifically, a kind of a drag and drop modelling tool to help that exact process. So you can actually come and have these meetings and then say, well, let's model that all out. And it's a simple but reasonably robust tool that kind of integrates into another larger model that's been developed out there. So we've been trying to support that initiative with these types of tools as well.
What is the cost to get a meeting like that?
I don't believe there's a cost.
No?
No, I think it's what we're trying to promote to come in. Obviously, there's the development charge and fee that we have, but we want to be able to come in and have those discussions and relationships as early as possible.
Okay.
Okay, I'll then hand it over.
Okay, thanks, Ben. Thank you so much, Ben. I really appreciate you grounding us really, really well in the science with that presentation. I'm Claire Malcolmson. I'm the Executive Director of the Rescue Lake Simcoe Coalition. So I'm just going to start going without the slides.
I'm going to get some help. This is weird.
Okay,
Yes.
I know it is weird. Thank you, Ben. So the Rescue Lake Simcoe Coalition is an environmental charity. We're non-governmental. We started in 2003 when a number of citizens and community groups around the lake became concerned with the health of the lake. They wanted to be more involved, and they wanted better transparency between government and what was actually happening on the ground. We've been around since 2003. We now have 25 member groups that mostly represent cottager groups around the lake. As of about a year ago, I became the first executive director of the organization. And the reason for that is because the Lake Simcoe Protection Plan, which is the best watershed-based legislation in Canada, was really our baby, and it's up for review this year by the provincial government. And I thought there really has to be a citizens organization that is prepared to defend this legislation and explain to those who don't know about it how it works, the importance of this legislation, and what changes we would propose be made to. All right, I think I'm just going to go on for
Sorry.
so long. No, it's okay. Okay. So I'm going to talk a little about our campaign to get this legislation in the first place. Some of the actions that we're taking in terms of educating the public, doing outreach. We've done some policy mapping in Simcoe County and in the Lake Simcoe watershed, and those are the materials that you'll see on the table there. Feel free to take any of that. I'm just going to talk a bit about what is sustainable development in this context, just to add to what Beck has said. And then also, I want to thank Ian Woods for reaching out and inviting me to get involved with this group. He came to an event that we had in Sutton in March during Water Week. We were launching our campaign to protect our plan. And he saw me speak and said, this is fantastic, no realtors really should be part of this, because I think we actually share a lot of the same concerns. My family's been cottaging at Lake Simcoe for 130 years, and we've in Innisfil, and we've seen the changes. We're stewards of the land. We're concerned about impacts to our lake, as would be many of the residents that you serve and the clients that you serve. We love the area because of the quality of the environment, the quality of the lake, and the access to green space. So, I think we have a lot in common, and really we're here to help bridge.
Sorry.
That's okay, I don't know. So this is why I print out the presentation. But my staple failed, so there's always something, right? Okay, so the campaign for the Lake Simcoe Protection Act and Plan began in 2005. The Rescue Lake Simcoe Coalition invited Ontario Nature and Environmental Defence, who are both large Ontario environmental NGOs, to create a campaign. It was called Campaign Lake Simcoe. First of all, we were interested in getting Simcoe County included in the Greenbelt. That did not work. So the second attempt was then to get legislation kind of like the Greenbelt or like the Oak Ridges Marine for this particular land feature, which is the gem of Southern Ontario, which is Lake Simcoe. What's interesting is that the spark was a citizens' fight at Moon Point in Oro-Medonte, which was approved for estate lot development. It was at the time what we believed to be one of 5 remaining wild shorelines on the lake, and had a beautiful natural area, which has now been turned into estate lots. So the residents there hired a lawyer who worked with Environmental Defence at the time to work with them, and so we became quite involved in their issue. And so some of the problems that they faced became the bars that we set for our advocacy for better protection for the lake. So no new development allowed to harm the shoreline is one of those tests. And in fact, the Lake Simcoe Protection Act and Plan have been quite successful at stopping or changing developments that would significantly have altered the shoreline. So that's one of the examples of a problem that we identified that was grounded in citizens' concerns that made it through the legislative process, which, by the way, I was involved in from the very beginning to of last year, a year ago, I stepped down from a provincial committee, which I was chairing, a multi-stakeholder committee with developers and farmers and fishermen and everyone. I stepped down so that I could wear this hat. The other spark was Big Bay Point. So many of you may know about that big fight. It was really nasty, but again, shoreline alteration was a significant issue there, and that project, as you know, went ahead. It was given a green light when the Lake Simcoe Protection Act and Plan were introduced, partly because it was already being negotiated, and I'm sure there's lots of other reasons why it was approved. So we campaigned to get the Lake Simcoe Protection Act and it's fascinating, with 35 groups around the lake and organizations in the watershed. Oh, it just go date modified, and it's the very most recent one. There you go, it'll be at the very top.
Yeah.
Thanks, and I think I'm on slide 4 or 5. Thank you. So one of the things that happened as the legislation was being created was the province put together a science committee. Okay, so the science committee identified the state of the lake at that time, and Ben has explained a lot about the state of the lake and the state of the environment, so I'm not going to go through that anymore. But what's important to know is that the targets that we have in the Lake Simcoe Protection Plan, back one, I think? Back 2. There we go. So this is us celebrating the passage of the Lake Simcoe Protection Act at Queen's Park. We really only got about 4 hours of notice, so we didn't get a big gang there, but we were really happy. Sarah Hermer is peeking through the back there. She was helping. So, okay, thanks. Oh, it's okay, no, I don't. So the scientific basis of the Lake Simcoe Protection Plan is very important. It allows us to continue referring back to the targets of the plan as being necessary to ensure the environmental conditions of the lake, really as Ben has just described. Okay. So the plan, the Lake Simcoe Protection Plan, was released 1 year later in 2009, and there is a statutory 10-year review. So that's what I'm really motivated for. That's why I stepped into this job this year at really quite considerable personal risk. Financially, really fun being the first executive director of a little tiny organization. Anyway, it's a good challenge. So we started our campaign in March of this year, and we had a launch event. Oh, actually, no, before I talk about that, I'm going to talk about Bill 66. So I had been in the executive director chair, which is just a chair in my house, for about a month, and then Bill 66 hit, and you probably remember this. There was a proposal to allow employment-oriented development proposals to bypass a huge long list of environmental legislation, and all the environmentalists freaked out and got together and campaigned. And we won that campaign. I volunteered countless hours making delegations to council, trying to help bring together the community groups that are part of our coalition to say, this is why this matters, this is what we suggest you say to council, and or they added their own bit. We won that, and that was really significant because for our organization, it put us back on the radar, reconnection with the journalists who I've known now. I've been working on Lake Simcoe for almost 20 years now, so I have a long history with a lot of the journalists. So we were in the news again, and that was helpful for an organization. But another really important thing came out of that, which was that our MPPs really heard us, and they represented us very well in caucus. And so when they were talking about what to do about Bill 66, we happened to know that our MPPs at Lake Simcoe really advocated for us and said, you know, our residents are really telling us how much they don't like Bill 66. This sounds like a really bad idea. So that was a really good example of the kind of work that we do, our ability to mobilize quickly and engage residents about issues that we all care about and win. And so we hope that we can carry that forward with Lake Simcoe Protection Plan. So we launched our campaign during Water Week, thinking that the Lake Simcoe Protection Plan review would happen earlier in 2019, then it hasn't even started yet. And so we got some native artists related that are friends with our friends at Georgina Island to come out and share some of their water protector stencils and some of their materials with us, sort of symbolically and also to help us with fundraising. That was great. We did a Speaker's Corner series and we created some videos from that. And then we created a outreach campaign, an outreach committee and an education committee, and those folks were unstoppable this summer. I was like, whoa, we can't handle all these events. But we ended up going to 11 different events, 14 days, got more than 800 signatures on a petition. Not just like click, but talk to someone, sign the petition, and we have a sample of the petition right there. You're welcome to sign. We'll present those to our MPP, MPP Andrea Kanjan and Jeff Yorick, who is the Minister of the Environment. So that was excellent, actually, to engage people in real person conversations. People were going to their knitting clubs with the petition. They were going door to door, knocking on their neighbors' doors. So these little tools really help connect people and help them understand there's an initiative to help them out. Okay. And then we took all these pictures of people showing their love for Lake Simcoe. We made a video that we're going to use at an event. We're hoping to host an event at Queen's Park this fall, so we'll be sharing that then. So really good outreach effort this summer. We've also created a whole lot of social media tools. We got some funding from a couple of foundations for that. So this is one of them. So just a different visual breakdown of some of the information that Ben presented, showing the sources of phosphorus. I think it's important to remind people of this because when I started this work in 2001, everyone thought it was the Holland Marsh, everyone thought it was the farmers. They are a problem, but it's actually, we need food, they don't have big profit margins, there's not as much that they have left to do as there is left to do in for example, the urban areas and development. So I'm gonna go. Only thing I'll add to what Ben said, what phosphorus loads is, you can see that there was a peak in the 80s on the dark blue line, phosphorus loads. They went down thanks to a lot of remediation efforts. Conservation Authority has a huge hand in this, so really hats off to them. We would be in big trouble without the Conservation Authority at Lake Simcoe. We have this phosphorus loading target of 44 tons. What the blue line represents is the phosphorus reduction strategy. So if it was a really good strategy, it would actually get us down to the 44-ton target, but it doesn't. In my opinion, there's too much reliance on new technology and on offsetting. I'm quite concerned about the phosphorus loads going up. I think offsetting is a reasonable thing to do in a kind of a bad situation, but we have not really ended the problem of having too much phosphorus going into the lake. And the plan that we have in place also doesn't get us there. So we really have a lot more work to do. That's kind of the upshot of that slide. So the Lake Simcoe Protection Plan, there are 118 policies in it. I'm not going to go through it all, but it's important to know some of the things that it does, some of the areas that were strengthened. I'm just going to read this list. So natural heritage and hydrological features, setbacks and protection. So better buffers around streams and rivers and significant natural heritage features like significant forests and wetlands. Mandatory septic inspection system within 100 meters of water. Protection for smaller wetlands is really important. Tougher sewage treatment plant phosphorus loading caps. All of the sewage treatment plants around the lake are going to have to work harder. They're going to have to use better technology to reduce the amount of nutrients that are coming out of those sewage treatment plants to bring their loads down over time. Science, monitoring, oversight. The Lake Simcoe Science Committee and Lake Simcoe Coordinating Committee are really meant to be the oversight body for the implementation of the Lake Simcoe Plan. Unfortunately, these committees that used to meet quarterly have not met since April 2018. I'm quite concerned about that. I don't think that shows a lot of transparency, and so we're really quite in the dark about what is being done. I chaired that committee in the last year or two. So that was really good, but I'm really disappointed that the committees are not meeting.
Would you mind saying that again? Who hasn't met since
There are
2000?
two committees that were created by the province, a science committee and a multi-stakeholder committee, coordinating committee. And that Ben and I were both been on those committees. And we used to meet quarterly, and the province has stopped that. We've not met. I'm no longer on the committee. I stepped down to do this. Yeah, so that's not a good sign. But when the province introduced the Lake Simcoe plan, they also created a Lake Simcoe team within the Ministry of the Environment, and there's $20 million in funding for projects and staff related to that, and that team did an excellent job. There are improved stormwater management guidelines, as Ben spoke about, and it enabled the phosphorus reduction strategy, which I referred to a little bit earlier. Ben talked about loads and flows. I just want to add to this. Now, you know, we have a slightly different interpretation, I would say, of the science sometimes. I am concerned about phosphorus loads still being more or less steady over the last 10 to 15 years. The average of these 5-year chunks that are measured has stayed pretty steady. So although we have had 20 million in provincial funding, at least 30 million in federal funding through the Lake Simcoe Fund, best watershed-based legislation in Canada, we're actually not bringing phosphorus loads down to a level to which I would feel that we're really moving in the right direction. So we need to know that. We're making some gains, as Ben pointed out, but not enough. Like, it's not time to take our foot off the gas or ease the restrictions that we have in place. They actually should be tougher, in my opinion. So what was not resolved by the Lake Simcoe Protection Plan? This is really the subject of my master's in planning at York. Two things really: impacts of growth and natural cover. The main reason for that is that the Lake Simcoe Protection Plan is a Ministry of the Environment plan. They don't regulate land use, and those two issues are land use related. So the impacts of growth, the province's phosphorus reduction strategy says this exactly: significant phosphorus loadings from development will occur. They have to be offset. Based on the development approved as of 2010, the impact is expected to be 9.2 to 15.3 tons per year of phosphorus being added to the lake from new development. We're trying to bring loads down, right? So this has been managed to some degree through the phosphorus offsetting program. But the reason that we have to have the phosphorus offsetting program is because we are still allowing so much growth in the Lake Simcoe watershed that's contributing this much to the phosphorus pollution problem. So it is important for us to know that that phosphorus from soils, from new developments, is part of the problem. And so there's a lot that we can do to make that better. I actually, something else there. Okay, I did want to mention here a little bit about how can we combat this. And for this audience, I think there's quite a lot that you can do. When you're interacting with people that are in the Lake Simcoe watershed, it's important for them to understand that as people who own land that they are in charge of, they can plant native species, they can put rain gardens in their properties to help manage flows of water. As an organization, you can support the kinds of initiatives that we're talking about. Low impact development, as Ben was describing, has a really important role in controlling the phosphorus that comes off development. But also, how we build is really important. And so I'm sure you have encountered people that are not a nuclear family and don't necessarily want the detached single family home. So that need that's growing with an aging population, combined with the need to reduce the footprint of the development that occurs in this area, sort of fit together. You can be advocating, as we do, for medium density and high density where it's appropriate. It reduces the footprint on the land of the development that occurs. We have growth coming. Can't really do anything about that. We're not arguing that. How we develop that's important. So supporting initiatives that that will create medium and high density that provides cradle-to-grave housing options for people is both socially and environmentally very helpful. And that's something that BDAR can actually be a part of. And it's also part of our provincial direction in the growth plan. The second piece that I think we have some control over that we are advocating for from the Rescue Lake Simcoe Coalition's perspective is increasing protections for natural cover. We're quite lucky in the Lake Simcoe watershed. We have about 35% natural cover right now, so that's forests and wetlands. The Lake Simcoe Protection Plan has a target, science-based target, of having 40% of the watershed in high-quality natural cover. About half of that is well protected. We're advocating for really all of that to be well protected. So to examine that a little bit more, we started a mapping project, and we were funded to produce 2 studies. The Simcoe County one is on the table there, and there's a fact sheet about that, and the Lake Simcoe watershed one I'm still working on. So here are the results of the Simcoe County one. We've divided the policies that apply to the entire landscape into 3 categories. 1, not protected, that's fine. The other farmland, built-up areas, other land cover, it's fine. The 14% there represents policies that really prohibit changes to the land use. So that would be areas of natural scientific interest, or ANSI, provincially significant wetlands, significant forests, those sorts of features. So those, with the exception of aggregate activity, which can occur virtually anywhere that there's aggregate, those areas are well protected. But they're not necessarily that well connected to each other. And the areas that are in yellow here are made up of a whole lot of different policies, but what they have in common is that they all allow for what I'm calling a death by 1,000 cuts. You can have a proposal to change the land use and modify the land in some way, and without a really robust natural heritage system, you're going to lose some of the ecological function. And 14%, 100 years from now, would be nowhere near what we need, right? We know that we need in the neighborhood of 40% natural cover. This is not the Lake Simcoe watershed, this is Simcoe County. But anyway, so this is some of the analysis that we've done. And then we did the same thing for the Lake Simcoe watershed. Now in the Lake Simcoe watershed, we're lucky because the Conservation Authority has this great natural heritage system and strategy, which I totally support, and they're working with municipalities to adopt that so that municipalities can add more land to their natural heritage system and protect, in particular, the linkages between these well-protected areas. So this is not the LSRC's NHS map, but we have more lands, a higher percentage of lands in that best protected category in the Lake Simcoe watershed. Some of the thinking is that we have the Lake Simcoe plan, Oak Ridge's Marine Plan, and Greenbelt Plan in a lot of the south and the southeast part of the watershed, where you do see many more features identified and protected. These features really matter to residents of the area, as I'm sure you know from the reasons why people come to these areas, and having connections between them is pretty critical for the long-term health of the environment. So the I'm going to try to just speed up here. Lake Simcoe Protection Plan review is going to happen this year, starting this year. We're hoping this month. We are going to basically try to react really quickly and respond to the province's proposal, whatever that is. And we will be reaching out to all the people on our list and all of our member groups to get their input, to get sign-on, and basically to present that to the government and run a campaign around that, saying these are the changes that we think would be helpful. And so it would be great if BDAR was involved in that in some way. And it's going to happen really fast, we think. The province can do a review like this in as little as 30 days. So what you can do, well, I'm going to highlight, what's here. He put together this really great educational ad in Lake Simcoe Living magazine, and he's offered to, if you list, sell, or buy waterfront property with Mr. Waterfront, he'll donate $1,000 to the Rescue Lake Simcoe Coalition on closing, which is fabulous. And also there are a lot of really good tips here. So this is a really nice thing to be able to share with your, with the people that you're interacting with, really anywhere in the watershed, but especially on the waterfront. So what you can do, donate. We're a small environmental charity. We're still looking for about $20,000 for this year. My pay comes and goes. We have a petition you can sign, you can share with your residents, with your members, with your neighbors, knitting club. I have some lawn signs in my car, which we've been holding on to until the election was finished. There's a little bit of lawn sign clutter out there. Join our contact list, share environmental tips with sellers and buyers. As I had said earlier, support transit supportive densities. So where it makes financial sense to run a transit system. Does that mean, do you understand what I mean when I say transit supportive density? So if you only have like 50 people in this block, you're going to run a bus. The bus is just going to be losing money all the time, right? So I've been living in Innisfil the last 4 years. There is no public transit in Innisfil because there is not enough density to make it make any economic sense. So if we do want public transit, we actually need better density in particular strategic areas. So I'm just saying there's a connection there between affordability, social outcomes, and environmental outcomes. Cradle to grave housing options, as I was saying, environmental design, and low impact development. These are all really helpful things for the environment and for your communities that you can be a part of helping to support. And then also BDAR can support our campaign in some way. And you can of course follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, check out our website, quite a lot of information there. Our priorities for the review of the Lake Simcoe Protection Plan are on our website as well, on our resources page. And I share a lot of news through Facebook, so it's a great group to belong to. It doesn't say you're aligned one way or the other, but it's a nice group to follow to get some Lake Simcoe news sort of curated. And that's, I'm out of time, and that's all I wanted to say. But I'm really happy to take any questions that you may have about anything that we've talked about today.
So the government's going to review the protection plan.
Right.
Do you have any indication of which direction they're going to go in?
Not officially, no. Many of the initiatives that we've seen so far from this government have been not good for the environment, so I suspect more of the same. But our MPPs, as I've said, they understand. They love Lake Simcoe too. They're hearing it from their residents. In the federal election campaign, Lake Simcoe was a top issue. I don't think that's happened before. We're doing a good job as environmental advocates, and we're helping people who care get on board with a campaign that has some positive direction. So I'm hopeful that our local MPPs will be able to help persuade Queen's Park that Lake Simcoe is worth saving. But we'll see what they do.
How are they going to approach this? Are they going to come to the table with a proposal of how they want to change the legislation, or are they going to, like, how does that happen?
I don't know. They typically do that. They typically write up a white paper with some proposed directions. This government tends to have been quite, so far they've been fairly vague in a lot of the ways that they propose changing things in contrast to previous administrations. So I would expect more of the same. They might say, for example, we want to do a cost-benefit approach to phosphorus reduction, and here are some ideas, and discuss. So I believe they have to by law consult with municipalities, conservation authority, affected ministries, and the public has to be given an opportunity to participate, I believe. So I think they would like to do public consultation, but it has not been announced yet.
And those scientists, or science groups that you were having quarterly meetings for, are they people that the government would have consulted before they come to the table?
Right, sorry, I should have said those two committees have to be consulted as well. Yeah, and when I was on the committee, we were preparing for their review. So I don't know, I can't speak to how they're interacting with the science committee. I talked to some members recently and they said that they don't know what's going on either.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the government's likely not talking to the scientists, they're just looking at ways to make changes without proper consultation, possibly?
Well, possibly. I mean, so I think all of this, I mean, I'm sorry that there's so many question marks.
Yeah.
It's not my fault.
No, I know, I'm just wondering what their strategies are.
I am too. I'm wondering what the strategy is. And I hope that what it means is that it's open and that we all have an opportunity to suggest some constructive ideas and suggest quite strongly that we follow the scientific advice of those who know Lake Simcoe best. Any other questions or comments? Happy to chat with people after. All right, well, thanks very much for learning about Lake Simcoe today and many people involved in helping to try to keep it clean for all of us.